Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the latest in our series of performance puzzle webinars. I'm Gary Cookson. I'll introduce myself a little bit, and this is our seventh in our series of 12 performance puzzle webinars. And today we're going to be looking at the role of internal communication on employee engagement. A bit of background if you've not joined us for one of these performance puzzle webinars before. A bit about me. I've got 20 years experience working in senior level HR roles in a lot of different sectors around the northwest of the UK. Do a fair bit of keynote speaking, delivering workshops and so on for various organisations. Got a young and growing family. That's an out-of-date photo now. I've now got a fourth child, as if three weren't enough. And I do a fair bit of sport around the place as well. And that often comes through in some of the work that I do around HR, leadership and so on, around the importance of personal well-being and things like that. So that's me. I'm with you today for about half an hour. I'm delivering this on behalf of MOL. Some of you will know MOL very, very well. And if you're not sure who MOL are, if you haven't come across some of their CIPD qualifications or the other workshops that they run, then there's more information available on the MOL website, and you can have a look at any of the information there. So let's have a think about what we're going to do today. Well, my content is going to take us about 20-25 minutes, and then there's time at the end for questions. If you've got questions as we go along, you can use the chat panel to send them through, and you can use the questions panel to send those through. Either of those are fine. If you want to tweet along on social media, then you can use the performance puzzle hashtag, and you can tweet MOL Learn, or you can tweet me, which is Gary_Cookson. Any of those methods are fine to interact with today. And today we're looking at a couple of different things. The performance puzzle webinars, if you've not come across them before, 12 different topics, 12 different themes around what makes a high-performing workplace. And this one is going to be particularly around the role of internal communications in employee engagement. And two particular objectives that I'm going to be focusing on today are these. I'm going to look at the impact that internal comms has on performance and engagement in the workplace, and look at some of the key building blocks to getting the right culture of internal communications in your workplace. And by all means, share examples from your own workplace today on Twitter, or using the questions panel or the chat panel. Let us know how things work in your workplace as well. And if you've seen, just very briefly, just then in the jigsaw puzzle slide, a couple of the other performance puzzle webinars, and maybe you haven't come across them before, if you get in touch with MOL Learn on Twitter or using some of the email addresses today, they'll be able to send you the links to all the ones that have been recorded. So let's get going. Firstly then, before I come on to a poll, a little bit of intro about why I think internal comms are important in a modern workplace. I think it's something that you can never get 100% right. It's like the question that you ask people, have you got enough money? The answer is always no. So is internal communications perfect in the workplace? The answer is always going to be no. But you can make it better than it currently is. You can look at what individuals need and how they respond to different things. And internal comms is defined as any employee to employee, employer to employee, or employee to employer communication. So there's three different aspects to it there, and you as an organization only tend to be in control of the mechanisms for two of those things. You can't always control the employee to employee things, but you can have an influence over it. And it's any medium, whether that's face-to-face, written, digital, things like that. And there's both a formal and an informal aspect to it. The informal touches a lot more on culture, and a running theme through all of these performance puzzle webinars and the ones to come is about having an adult relationship with people at work. And that's a running theme, and it's one we'll explore more in other webinars. But the formal hints at a more planned and structured approach, and that's what we're going to focus on today. And it is important for a range of different things. The CIPD publish a lot of research on employee engagement and the role of internal communications, and they say it's a vital part of developing transparency, especially where there might be damaged trust and where you might need to restore the working relationship. And they comment on the need for clear and consistent internal messaging about what the organization's all about, how the workforce contributes to things like change, how they integrate technology, things like that. And the CIPD conclude their views by saying that good employee communication helps people to understand the organizational purpose and strategy, helps people identify with the values and develop a sense of belonging and understanding how they fit in to the organization. And employees who feel there's a culture of open communication are much more likely to contribute, much more likely to feel committed. So let's have a look at a poll. The poll is going to open in a second. It's going to ask you this question about whether you in your organization have an internal comms plan or strategy already, and a range of different answers there for you. So this should launch imminently for you. And the poll is there. Feel free to give us your responses to that poll as soon as you're able. And I'll let this run for a couple of seconds. And I'm looking for some patterns in the answers here. And many of the organizations I come across don't have a real clear definition of what internal communication actually is and how it differs from external communication. And I think there are some clear differences. There's sometimes a lack of clarity over how to measure it, which is something we're going to come on to later on. Sometimes a bit of confusion about how to do internal communication, some barriers in place to do with demographics or sector, and some real cultural issues come out as well around leadership behaviors particularly and how they impact internal communication. So these are themes that we're going to explore today. Just let the poll run for about 10 more seconds. I can see that almost everybody has voted now. And I'm going to close this poll now. And what I'm going to do now is share the results for you. So the results should be showing for you at the moment. And you can see there a real mix of things coming through. Lots of people having, 60% of organizations have an internal communications plan or strategy, but well over half of them saying, well, it's not really working. So we've got something in place, but I don't think it's quite right. I don't think it's being effective. Some people saying, yes, it's really effective. So the 20% who answered the second option there, be really great if you could put something in chat or questions or on Twitter that tells us what it is you think is making it really work well in your organization. Some examples would be fantastic to see. And a large chunk of people saying, no, we haven't got anything in place. It's probably more of an ad hoc approach, which is very common in organizations, very common. So close that poll down and let's move on to some insights here. This is drawing on the CIPD research, which you can see here is from a report they've got called Harnessing the Power of Internal or Employee Communications. So if you want to research that, you can find it. And you can see some of the main points that they make there. And I would add to that with some research of my own and some surveys that I've seen, one in particular with an organization called Staffbase, where they outline the reasons why internal communications is important. It's about purpose. Employees want to know their goals. They want to know how the organization is going to get to where it wants to be. And they need to be confident how they can contribute to that. They want to feel valued, listened to, and they want to feel part of the team. And it's especially true for people entering the workplace now. I don't like stereotyping around Generation Z and millennials, but often the younger generations rely heavily on feedback and on interaction because they've grown up in the age of social media. They're used to having a constant flow of likes, shares, comments. And if they go into a workplace that doesn't do that, that hasn't got those things, then they're going to feel a bit of disengagement there, not so much aligned. And it's important as well that you as an organization remain in control of whatever messages you've got and the origin of those messages. Employees shouldn't learn important company news from outside the company. But we're battling against a lot of technology here. We get most of our news through our smartphones and social media, and that can intimidate many companies. But the only way to deal with it is learn to match the speed of external communications and developments in the media by having a really on the ball internal communication strategy, making sure you've got internal points of view readily available, not just when there's a crisis, but all the time. It has a major impact on your brand, both inside and outside the organization. And if you've got happy employees who are engaged, then that improves the way they interact with customers as well and has the corresponding impact there. Great brands, say Staffbase, are built from the inside out. You start with your employees. If you communicate with them right, you get the basics right, and then they'll communicate with your customers. There's obviously a role for internal comms during crisis situations, and lots of examples that lots of managers will communicate less during a crisis when in fact the opposite needs to be true. During a time of crisis or emergency or critical incident in an organization, internal comms needs to be at the forefront of what's happening in the organization. Can help you with recruitment, retention as well. If you've got a really good internal comms system, really transparent culture, it gives your company an edge in a competitive market. There's no better advert for your brand than happy employees who feel they're well informed and involved in what's going on. And it enables you to manage the rumor mill in your organization and get some more transparency. So if you've got a really good internal communications strategy platform, it can slow down or sometimes even speed up the rumor mill because you're in control of it. You can communicate timely and frequently and help employees to interpret information as well as instructions as well. So it is really good. However, not many organizations know how to judge the effectiveness of their internal communications, and many will rely upon employee engagement as the prime measure for assessing how effective their internal communications are. So I'm going to launch another poll in a second about engagement as a measure and just see how you're currently measuring it. What's the frequency of your measuring of employee engagement? And this should launch imminently for you. So tell us if we are using engagement as the measure of effectiveness of internal communications, how are you measuring it? Is it daily, weekly, monthly, annually, or ad hoc? So feel free to give us your views on that one. And I can see people starting to vote already, which is brilliant. And the reason why I asked this question, engagement is the most common measure of the effectiveness of your internal comms. And it's one that's fairly easily understood, applicable to lots of different organizations. But often what you find is organizations will do it not frequently enough to really judge the cause and effect here. Lots of organizations will do it annually. Lots of organizations will do it ad hoc. And sometimes that means it's not as proactive, it's more retrospective and therefore a static picture of engagement and the effectiveness of internal comms. I'm going to close this poll down now and share the results with you because they're backing up what I've just been saying. Look there about how many organizations are measuring engagement retrospectively, static picture, or an ad hoc thing. And I'm not sure there whether it's down to individual level or team level. Possibly it's the whole organization. If you've got examples of this, please throw them in chat or throw them in questions. But the poll results are interesting there because what's happening there is organizations are measuring sometimes even 11 months after a piece of internal communications has happened and trying to establish whether that was effective. And it's no use trying to measure things on an annual basis. The annual employee survey, I think, is an out-of-date concept in organizations. Executives will like it because it ticks many boxes for them. But if you're looking to increase engagement, an annual survey is not the way to do it. An annual survey is also not the way to measure it. So I'd encourage you to find sometimes more frequent, even daily ways of measuring engagement. Sometimes ad hoc can be a good way of doing it. So I'm pleased to see some ad hoc things, but as long as there is some thought behind that, and there's a strategy that underpins what you're doing in an ad hoc basis. And I'm going to give you a few examples, a couple of case studies interspersed with a poll of what I've seen work. So I'm going to hide these poll results, move on to my first case study. This is an organization where I used to work, and I was here for 12 years as head of HR. And things that worked for me, having a strategy to deal with change and having a strategy to build engagement during change. Internal comms becomes really important when the organization is transforming. Most organizations are constantly transforming. So your internal comms systems need to be couched in and structured in a change model. And I used Kotter very well to that effect. So have a look at different change models. What's important to people during the different phases of change, and tailor your internal comms to that. I also branded the change. So if we're going through a big change program, I used to get employees involved in naming the change program, get a bit of banter going about it, and it really worked and helped people to engage with the different platforms we were using. Very transparent as well about how often we were going to communicate with people and on what platforms, so they knew upfront what to expect. Didn't rely on cascading as well. It worked. You can get managers feeding messages out to their teams if you want to. So you tell the managers, they tell the teams. But what happens there is you get subconsciously managers will filter information and change the message somehow. So the internal communications platforms that you have should allow for everybody to be told everything at once. And don't be afraid of doing that. Remain in control of that message. Also tell people when there's no news about things. So I was doing a big pay and rewards project, and there were large parts of that project where there was nothing to tell people. And I found during those times that people filled in the gaps themselves. They made stuff up. So what I learned from that was that when there was a time when nothing was happening on that project, where I was waiting for a few weeks or even months for something to come back, tell people. Don't be afraid of saying, we've actually no news this week. And that helps people quite a lot. Keep people involved as well. Don't design your employee engagement and internal comms mechanisms yourself. Get your employees to design them with you. Get your trade unions or other people to design it with you. And make sure your leaders are involved in managing the internal comms things. Don't leave it to your comms team, your HR team, your marketing team, whoever it is. Get your leaders involved in actively managing and promoting internal communications. Otherwise it won't work. And give people the opportunity to get feedback as well. So we used to have something called the daily pulse. It was a daily measure of engagement, a box at the door on your way out that said, how's your day been? And it was a red frowny face and a green smiley face, and you press one of those buttons, and it was a real good way of just checking what was happening during the organization during that particular day, and then doing something about it the following day. And you could usually track back spikes in green smiley faces or red frowny faces to something that a manager had said that day, or something that the internal comms platforms had published that day. And it was really interesting to see. So it's quite a good thing to have defined internal comms platforms like internal social media to help you capture engagement, to help you capture some of the momentum around the way people communicate in organizations nowadays. So have some internal social media. I think it's a real good thing to do. And I've got a poll just to ask you on that, because not many people will have internal social media. So let's have a look at what's in use at the moment. I'm going to ask you a question about what platforms, what mediums or apps you're using to manage your internal communication. I'm hoping you're using as many of these as you can. Now, there's no right answer to this. I'm just interested in what you're using. And if it's something else, then tell us in chat. But I'm interested what internal social media you're using to communicate. I've used 3 out of the 5 there, and they're all good. And there's no such thing as best practice. You can use this tech to communicate, but you've got to bear in mind at all times that you might be behind the times. How are your employees communicating with each other outside of the organization? Have they set up WhatsApp groups? Are they Snapchatting each other? Are they putting together Instagram stories, or are they just talking face to face? So if you're there using particular mediums to communicate, then so should you. Don't try and communicate with your employees if it's not the way they would communicate with each other. If you want fast, instant, two-way communication, then you need a digital and mobile platform like one of these. So I'm going to close this poll and share these results. Mixture of things here. So you can see lots of different things here in use. So Yammer's well used, Microsoft Teams well used, Slack little bit, Skype Business is being used as well. No one's using Facebook for work, and I wonder why, because most people would use Facebook for personal use outside the organization and share information that way. So interesting that people are using those things. What I would say is that in all organizations there is already a low-tech social network in your organization already. It's possibly verbal. It's possibly the gossip mill, the rumor mill. It's possibly controlled by a small number of people. You need to find out who's in control of that low-tech network and use it. Don't be afraid of using rumors as part of your internal communication strategy. If that's how news spreads around the organization, you'd be foolish not to tap into that. So find out how individuals are communicating and replicate that. Don't try and force them to use something like Yammer or Slack if they wouldn't use that themselves through personal choice. So I'm going to hide this one now and move on to a second case study. This is another organization I worked for. It was a further education college. I was HR director there for about 18 months. When I came in, there was no internal comms strategy. Very reactive. Nobody was actually taking an overview of internal comms. The marketing team had control of external comms, and when they got round to it, they would tell employees stuff. And it was an all right place to work, but more through luck than judgment. Very reactive. No one knew why or how the organization had become a reasonable place to work or that we had decent engagement, but no one was doing anything about it. No one understood it. So I brought in lots of consultative groups. I brought in lots of different mechanisms to communicate with employees that were two-way, so they could create the content for an online newsletter. We set up Yammer, so internal social media, and got people talking about the organization that way. We lifted a ban on using external social media. There was a ban on people tweeting about the organization, so we lifted that. We started sharing future plans of the organization through these different forums and meetings and let people question them. We gave people more chance to contribute to the direction of the organization, and we encouraged them to use more data that was available on these platforms to make decisions and share information. And it was a really good way of starting to build an internal communication strategy. So there's lots of examples, and I've shared 2 today, but I could share 20 of organizations that are doing things really well. And I'm sure there's lots of your organizations that are doing things well too. So if you want to throw some examples in chat or throw some examples in questions or even tweet them, then we can talk about these when I finish in a few minutes. I think what you see here is, and this is a great photo that I share quite a lot to illustrate the impact of disengaged employees. This is somebody who was so disengaged with how he or she felt in their organization that they couldn't be bothered to lift up that branch to paint a straight line. They weren't feeling connected to the organization. Their internal communication strategies were not working. So it was much better for that employee to walk around and do a jagged line rather than picking it up. They weren't engaged. If you keep people informed, you keep them involved. If you communicate, even when you've got nothing to say, if your leaders are visible, they're honest, they're transparent, and you use lots of different mediums, you'll avoid a situation like this. And if you think about the customer experience that you often have, or you may deliver to your own customers, often people will jump all over the customer experience, particularly on social media. But do we jump all over the employee experience in the same way? I'm not convinced we do. Yet these people represent and communicate our brand. I listened to Jens Hofmer, the chief exec of Pizza Hut, talk about 12 months ago, and he said, "Nothing's more important than the happiness of my staff." And I think that's a nice approach to have. You need to make sure your staff have got all the information they need, all the data they need from you, from other people in the organization to deliver the best service, whatever that service is. And if you can treat people like adults, like I said before, if you can communicate with them in a way that makes them feel valued, makes them feel respected and involved and informed, then you'll unlock the next piece of the performance puzzle. So that's really where I want to finish my bit today. I've covered in about 25 minutes quite a lot to do with employee engagement and internal comms. I've talked to you about a couple of case studies where I've built internal comms strategies. We've talked about the importance of it as well. We've talked about how you can use different platforms to do it, but also tap into the way employees want to communicate with each other. I could talk all day about internal comms and often do. So if you want to carry on the conversation with me after the event, please get in touch with me. I'm at Gary_Cookson on Twitter. You can use the hashtag performance puzzle. You can send me questions on here, and I'm going to go into the questions panel and just see if there's any that need answering at the moment. I can't see any particular questions that have come through in there that answer, but if any do come through after I've finished, then I'll be happy to take those. Just having a look in chat, can't see any particular questions that I need to pick up on in chat, but again, if you've got questions, then please send them through to me. You can contact MOL Learn after the event as well, but there's a little bit of time before we finish just to see if there's any other questions. So if anybody's got any, please throw them into the questions panel or into the chat panel. And if there isn't, then we'll be finishing in about a minute's time. So I'll just go quiet just while I wait to see if there's any questions. Okay, I'm just having a look again in the questions panel. I can't see that there are any yet. Often there's a delay in some of these reaching me, so if any come through after I've finished the recording, I'll make sure that I email the answers out to anybody who may be interested. As I've been talking, there's somebody's asked me a question there. It's a question from Ike, who says, what daily pulse have I used in the past? Well, the one I used was from a company called Kelpax, and I'll give you the company name in the chat panel, which is Kelpax. So you can have a look at them. They're a Swedish company, and they provided the one that I used. However, I mustn't endorse them particularly because other products are available, but that was the one that I used at Golden Gates Housing Trust. If anybody else has got any questions, they're likely to come through now after I finish the recording, and I'll make sure that they're answered after the event. So it's been wonderful to have you with me for the last 25-30 minutes. If you want to talk to me after the event, feel free. I'd love to hear from you, but feel free to log off whenever's right for you, and I'm going to end the recording now. Thank you very much, and I'll see you next month.